All right, everybody. Hello, and welcome to a bonus episode of Beyond the Breakers, a podcast about shipwrecks, loss, lessons learned from maritime disasters. You know that. This is Patreon. You know what we do here, what we're up to. This is a makeup recording, so this is technically going to be the November bonus episode. We lost the original one.
We were already late, and then we lost the original one, thanks to Zencastr.
Yeah, it was already going to come out in December anyway, and then that one got deleted halfway through. So here we are, back again. We have Zencastr hopefully working. We're running backup recordings with Audacity.
It truly is our fault, I guess, for not doing local backup, but lesson learned. I think every podcaster has a lost episode or two, right?
Yeah, we've never had that issue before with Zencastr. The only other time we really ever lost a recording was when we did the whaleback episode, and that was just because my mic settings were wrong.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
It actually wasn't a malfunction. It recorded everything we told it to record. It just wasn't recording me. So this is attempt number 2 to talk about the 2016 film, The Finest Hours. So we watched this, what is it, like 2 weeks ago now? A week ago?
Yeah, I had seen it a few years ago, and then I rewatched it for this. And I know it's one that people have written in about a little bit, about the Pendleton and just about this movie in general. So it's a good one to do for a bonus episode.
Aside from the book Dead Wake, I think this is the only media that we've ever gotten like multiple fan recommendations for.
Right.
So yeah, originally when we recorded this episode, I had watched it or finished watching it the day that we recorded it. So it was very fresh in my mind. And now not as much. So also the problem with my notes is that when I go through my notes, I check off the things that we've covered and gone through. And now all of my notes are already checked.
The whole system is just messed up now.
Yeah, it's like trying to do like a workbook or something where all the answers are already filled in. So as we just mentioned here, this movie tells a story of shipwreck, survival, all the kind of stuff that we enjoy on this show.
Loss. We don't enjoy loss.
There's some loss.
That's the bad part.
And some rescue. So specifically, this is the story of the SS Pendleton and her crew. It's based on the book of the same name, The Finest Hours, by Michael Togis. And actually on YouTube, there was a cool talk that he was giving it. It was some society event type thing where he's talking about the book. So if you want to hear the author talk about the book, there's ways to do that. I have not read the book, just the movie. Maybe I'll check that out at some point. The movie's got a pretty solid cast.
I was pretty surprised at how decent the cast is for this being like, this is just like a B-level Disney movie. Like, it's made by Disney.
Yeah, it's got stars Chris Pine. He's the main character. Eric Bana is in it.
Yeah, Eric Bana was the name that jumped out the most. I know him from like Munich and Black Hawk Down and stuff.
Yeah, he plays an interesting character in Black Hawk Down. He's in Troy.
I actually think he's pretty good in Munich, which I haven't seen that movie in a long time, and I'm sure it's not as good as I remember it because I'm an adult now. But right. I think he's a decent actor in it.
I feel like Eric Bana is always good in the stuff that he does. I didn't know he was Australian until very recently.
I didn't know he was Australian. I thought Eric Bana was some sort of European.
Well, yes, but funneled and strained out for a few centuries.
We have the talented Affleck brother in this one.
Casey, yeah. He plays kind of the other main character in this.
I stand by that Casey Affleck is actually a better actor than Ben Affleck.
He's in some good stuff. The only movie I've seen with him is probably the assassination of, what's it called? The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Yeah, like the worst name movie ever, but an awesome movie. I actually really like that movie. Brad Pitt does a really good job in that one.
It's got Holliday Grainger, who anyone who watched The Borgias, like on Netflix, might recognize as Lucrezia Borgia.
That kind of sounds like a Hermione Granger parody that would be in a certain type of...
Holiday Granger.
Yeah, that would be in a certain type of movie.
I can see that.
Are you going on holiday?
She's in The Borgias. Graham McTavish.
I think that's a Call of Duty character.
He plays noteworthy roles, at least for me, was he plays Dwalin in the Hobbit movies. He's one of the dwarves.
Oh, like not like the main dwarf, but like one of the other ones.
Yeah, kind of one of the mid-tier dwarves.
B-level dwarf.
Yeah, I mean, of of the dwarves from The Hobbit who like play a bigger role, I mean, obviously Thorin, but then like Balin he sort of stays in the story because he's Gimli's cousin.
Oh, okay. He's like descended from dwarf royalty.
And Gimli is Gloin's son, and Gloin is another one of the dwarves from The Hobbit.
I feel like we're reading one of those books in the Old Testament of the Bible now.
And Beaver beget Bomber, and Bomber beget Bofer. Boferty's nuts. Rachel Brosnahan is in it, and I think this was before Marvelous Mrs. Maisel started.
Oh, really? That's one of those series that I've been meaning to watch, and like the clips I see of it always look really good, but I have not watched it.
It's pretty good. I mostly watched the first season because Katie really enjoys it.
Uh-huh.
So I've seen a decent bit of it. It's not a show that makes me want to like sit down and watch it. I don't really basically any show that has any, I don't know. I have such a hard time sitting down and watching series, even series that I like enjoy episodes of.
Uh-huh.
It has to be very special for me to sit down and watch it. And
that's weird because like I'm like that with movies. I'd rather watch a series than a movie.
Like
I feel like 2 hours. I don't want to just spend 2 hours and be done. I want to binge.
Honestly, the only series that really hold my attention consistently are horror series. So like Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor.
1899 when we watched that finally.
Yeah, I haven't watched that yet, but
I haven't watched that either.
Katie and I want to check that out.
That might play in a bonus episode at some point. Who knows?
Midnight Mass. I know I've talked about that on a previous episode, even though I didn't love Midnight Mass. But yeah, series that I really love at first, like The Boys, great example. I mentioned it on one series, getting into that. That is the last time I watched an episode of The Boys. That was months ago.
I do think that like the 30-minute series are easier. Like What We Do in the Shadows, it's like the perfect amount of time commitment. And like every week I was looking forward to catching up on that. So
we like What We Do in the Shadows. Abbott Elementary we really enjoy, from both being, around the teaching world, since Katie got her certification. But yeah, those 30-minute ones are better because it's like perfect for making dinner, sitting down, watching the show, and then your episode is done. So anyway, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is pretty funny from what I've seen. Tony Shalhoub is in it. He's
okay, really I like Tony Shalhoub.
He plays her dad. Did you ever watch Boardwalk Empire?
I have seen a little bit of Boardwalk Empire, but not all of it. I also constantly mix up Boardwalk Empire and Peaky Blinders.
I can see that.
Similar.
There's a lot of similarities there.
Like one's just more Irishy, I feel like.
Let's see. So we're back to our movie here.
Yeah, let's talk about this movie again.
So the movie opens in Wellfleet, Massachusetts in November 1951.
I love that in like the New England part of America, we still have the fun, like really British names for cities.
Like with The Perfect Storm, we open with some very excellent New England accents.
It's like they just tell them all to do the most Boston thing you can do. It's like they're never played subtly, I don't feel like.
So Chris Pine and a friend are meeting up. It's like a blind double date. Is that what they're doing?
I think it feels like the 50s version of like meeting up like with a Bumble date or something. Like they've I think they know each other through his brother or something somehow.
Okay.
Or like they know of each other because like they've been exchanging letters, but like they've never met face to face.
Yeah, because they have to like ask each other, like, are you Miriam? Are you whoever?
I guess that's how that worked in the 50s. You're just like, oh, you know my family, I know your family. Let's go get a malt.
Perfect. So yeah, they meet up and obviously they hit it off. Miriam has an interesting line here talking to... It's weird that Chris Pine's character's name is Bernie because like I can't think of a young person having that name, but this is in the 50s. So of course all of the old people named Bernie would have been young people then.
Right.
She says, I'm not afraid of the water, Bernie. It scares me at night, that's all. You can't see what's underneath. And Chris Pine says, just more water.
I mean, he's not wrong. It is weird though, like psychologically, like how different do you feel if you're in a 10-foot body of water or 1,000-foot body of water? Why is the 1,000-foot body of water like more scary?
Yeah, even if you stretch that out a little bit, say like 20 feet of water or 1,000 feet of water, you could easily drown in both of those. But because you are, I guess because you have more of a chance, maybe you feel like you can get out of something if there's less of it. But yeah, not being able to see the bottom of not just water, but like I feel like any sort of like hole where you can't see the bottom is not good.
I guess also at 20 feet versus 1,000 feet, you're not going to like die of the bends. So there is that.
Yeah, that's true. Something I've had an irrational fear of since elementary school.
I got heights. I don't like just being on like a tall building.
I know, but like you could conceivably be on a tall building.
Yeah, I just won't enjoy.
I'm never going to be in a situation where I could get the bends.
You say that now.
It terrifies me though. Like I could just do it on accident and be the first person to ever do it, like on land.
If we ever like visit the Great Lakes in Duluth and you're peer pressured into going scuba diving, you'll regret this.
Going bending, it's where you dive Purposely. And you give yourself the bends. It's what kids are doing now instead of fentanyl. So they want to take a tour around the harbor. So instead of going out on a dory, because you'll never take a cow home in a dory on such sea, Bernie asks a local if he can borrow the boat, the Anna G, presumably named for Warren G's sister.
Not to like be boring about it, aren't there a lot of like insurance like implications here and stuff, and like who's paying for the fuel? Like in real life, I'd be like, no, you're not touching my boat. You have nothing to do. You know what I mean? We talked about that issue in the Holo Holo, where you had like kind of the rich guy who had this boat and then just sold it to this other guy who was going to use it for research purposes, but the guy's name was still on the title to the boat. Right.
So it's like, that doesn't seem ideal for insurance purposes. So we flash forward here to February 1952.
I definitely miss this flash forward, like the second time watching it. And there was a solid 15 seconds where I was like, what is going on? If this is developed quickly.
Mm-hmm. Courtship was a quick thing in the 1950s.
Yeah, it kind of was, I guess.
Like 45 seconds.
Also, they're old for getting like together in the 50s. Like they should have been married like years ago.
Right. So Bernie's teaching Miriam how to dance and he's being very encouraging. He's being very sweet.
It's fun that they kind of flipped the paradigm there.
Right. Yeah. I like that detail that, the guy, who, we find out is like, a Coast Guard guy, a sailor, presumably tough guy type. He's the one who is comfortable dancing and, being out on the dance floor. And she's the one who needs a little bit of motivation. And she like doesn't know how to do all the stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's just really a shame to see someone so woke in the 1950s. Critical race theory strikes again.
I was about to try to say critical race theory in a Boston accent, and I realized it would probably just sound exactly the same. So Miriam proposes, hence your confusion, probably.
Yes. Yep.
if you don't catch the flash forward.
I definitely was scrolling TikTok for a second and regretted it.
I've never scrolled TikTok, but I know I would regret it if I did. Every TikTok I've ever seen is a TikTok that you've sent me.
Keep it that way. Do not download the app.
It's nice to have a filter of someone to like look at TikTok and be like, oh, like Tanner would enjoy this.
Right.
The cupbearer for like King, like tasting all of the stuff before.
I only bring you the finest TikToks sourced from all over the world.
So Miriam proposes. Bernie says no. Obviously it doesn't make Miriam happy. She exits the building, goes outside. He follows. And Bernie kind of explains a little bit more because it is kind of weird at first. He just says no and doesn't add anything to that. And he says that he's reluctant because it's only been a few months, and he expresses some concern about the upcoming storm.
Yeah, it's weird that like this one storm is playing a role like in that, not just the idea of storms in general.
Mm-hmm. He says sometimes you go out and you don't come back. Anyway, they eventually agree to get married on April 16th.
Do they offer any real resolution there? Or is it just like, no, all right, we'll get married?
Basically, yeah. I feel like it's kind of clunkily done a little bit.
I definitely feel like the shipwreck portion of this movie is done better than the love story portion. Like, I think you can kind of tell that they kind of had to tack a love story onto this.
It sounds like you're describing the movie Titanic.
Well, also, it is funny. We should point out that the proposal continues that thing of flipping the paradigm around. That she's proposing to him, which, I mean, even today, I feel like isn't what's expected, and definitely not in 1952.
Right, and then that even comes up later when he's talking to one of the other Coast Guard guys. They're like, "She proposed to you?" Something like that. Bernie mentions that he has to get permission from his commanding officer in the Coast Guard, Daniel Clough, that is played by Mr. Eric Bana. So the scene now cuts out to the Pendleton, a T2 oil tanker that's currently 10 miles northeast of Chatham, Massachusetts.
We're finally to the fun part.
So the ship's battling some rough seas. You see waves breaking over her deck.
Waves breaking over the railing?
Exactly, that too.
Yep.
The cool thing about this, and like The Perfect Storm, is these are movies that I feel like probably would be better seen on a big screen for all of this, all the environmental stuff with all the big waves and the wind and the rain. Watching it on my relatively small living room TV probably doesn't capture that.
One thing I'm thinking about as we're doing this, kind of talking, it's interesting that you could have today, if you made this movie and like it was a bigger budget, maybe you would really only do like the Pendleton portion of this. You know what I mean? Like you could make an action movie just around the shipwreck part. I feel like we're still trying to do like the Pearl Harbor thing here, where it's like, hey, we have this action, but really we got this love story. You know what I mean? That's, I think, why it feels tacked on a little bit.
I remember we kind of hate watched Pearl Harbor in my wars class in senior year. And I remember Mr. White threw the remote at the television when there was a line where Josh Hartnett picks up the phone and yells, "I think World War II just started."
Carl, this is Walker. We need to get those planes fueled and loaded right now. What's going on out there? Huh? Danny, what the hell's that noise? You guys doing target practice or something? I think World War II just started.
It's funny timing, but this week, the podcast, The Worst of All Possible Worlds, actually analyzes Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor for like 2.5 hours. I highly recommend people check that out.
I don't think I knew that was a Michael Bay movie.
It makes a lot more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. I don't think I ever would have guessed that was a Michael Bay movie.
That is a Michael Bay movie. So many issues in that movie. We don't even have time. We might, you know what? One day we might watch it just because we can do whatever we want in our bonus episodes. And there are ships that sink, so
that's true. Maybe the maritime disaster is the movie Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
So on the Pendleton, one crewman who's played by Casey Affleck, he is an engineer, I guess presumably like the chief engineer. He's on the phone with the captain, and he's explaining that a recently fixed weld likely isn't going to hold in these conditions. And if I remember correctly, that's a true detail of the story. They had just been repaired.
Yeah, some maintenance work. I mean, I don't know. We haven't really talked about like the T2 tankers. Well, I guess we have some, like the Marine Electric, that type of thing. These are old ships. These are like old Liberty ships. And like these bad welds and problems, like it's not uncommon. Like these things are kind of patchwork together. And, that kind of culminates eventually in like the Marine Electric tragedy. And a lot more regulation comes in. But at the time, this vessel isn't that old. In 1952, it was probably, I don't know what year it was built, but probably 44, 45. They're just not a high quality vessel. I mean, at the time, we were going for the quantity game.
So he makes a request to the captain to take their speed down to 3 knots. And I think Casey Affleck acts this line really well. He says, if we don't slow it down, we might not have a position to hold.
Yeah, I like that. That was a well done line. Again, showing why he's a better actor than Ben Affleck. The
way that he holds that just like a half second longer than I feel like most actors would. And that I feel like it adds to his expressing his discomfort in the scene, saying, I know exactly what we need to do, but I technically need your permission.
Right. Yeah, that is a good line.
However, he's told to stay at 7 knots. So the ship begins taking water, with crewmen being thrown around inside. Siebert, that's Casey Affleck, he reports an 18-foot fracture in the hull, and he says that the pumps can't hold forever.
That's a big fracture. That is a bigger fracture than I would want to deal with.
There's no way your pumps are good enough to deal with that.
Right.
So a crewman goes to report to the captain, and one of probably the coolest scene in the movie, as he's crossing the deck, he nearly just walks off the ship.
Yeah, that was a cool scene.
Because it's been sheared in half. So there's this kind of like pan out where you see like just kind of this sheer face of the ship. You can like see into the compartments, and you've got this guy standing on the edge, realizing, hey, I should probably tell someone about this. So you kind of see the two sections of the ship floating near each other, and then it fades to black.
I mean, it would be a bad feeling. I mean, I feel like, you see your ship split in two and like, well, we didn't hit anything. We didn't get hit by anything. What happened?
Well, according to most shipping companies in the 1950s, nothing happened, and the ship is still in one piece.
Right.
So back at the Coast Guard station, Bernie talks with another guy about the Fort Mercer, which is another tanker that seems to be breaking up, and they're listening to this over the radio. Talking about the air conditions, talking about gale force winds at 50 to 60 miles per hour.
It is. I mean, how crazy is that, though? Like, when you have two of these things going on at once, it has to be pretty confusing. It's like you're not even sure, like, oh, yeah, I know about the ship that's sinking. No, not that one. The other one that's also doing the exact
There's
same
another
thing.
one that's like, 10 miles away. Like, so cut back to the Pendleton, the crew that are, left in the stern half of the ship. They're huddled together. They're praying. One of the crew makes the comment, praying's great, but it ain't everything.
Yep, you always have to have that guy, right?
They have a discussion about launching the lifeboats. Something we talk about so often on the show is how there's typically an extremely small window where lifeboats are even usable, especially at this time that we're talking about.
Well, yeah, and how many times have we talked about that, where the lifeboats are never a good option. Sometimes it's your only option. Like it's not rare, but it's, they don't even always get launched. Even when they do, you have situations like the Milwaukee. They end up finding guys, a week later stuck in the boats.
We're in our Lusitania series. There's major issues with the lifeboats with Lusitania.
Mm-hmm.
Just the physical, getting them launched with the speed that the ship's sinking. It's like kind of not until very, very recently that lifeboats are even like not a sure thing still, but they're useful in situations where they wouldn't have been before.
Right.
Like in our very first episode with Alfaro, talking about with those old lifeboats they might as well not have had them because they weren't going to help them at all in that situation.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the situation we have here. So Siebert goes to address the men and try to come to a decision. And he tells them that they're definitely sinking and that they have 4, maybe 5 hours. I think it's cool, kind of like we said with the gender roles being flipped in the relationship. You kind of also see a member of the crew who normally doesn't really get a ton of the spotlight in any of the stories we tell.
Mm-hmm.
The chief engineer being the one who sort of has to take over and become essentially the captain of what's left.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like, granted, it's a true story, but in a storytelling sense, you found a way to like get rid of all the leader type characters and like the officers and stuff. So now like the regular guy has to take charge and do it.
Yeah, the guy who has like a very specialized knowledge, but doesn't presumably have much experience with having to be the leader, the decision maker.
Right.
I think it's even telling that the first time we see him on screen, he's making a request.
Yeah, that's a good point, rather than giving an order or something.
So the radio comes back online, they get that fixed, and the men get concerned about the other ship, the Fort Mercer, that's breaking up and how it might affect them getting rescued.
That can't be a good feeling when you think you're in like competition for Coast Guard resources.
Yeah, they hear this other ship, with this rescue process, and they wonder, well, that's not good for us. So back at the station, a crew is dispatched to the Fort Mercer. And Bernie is assigned to help tie up the boats at the fish pier. Throughout the movie, there's kind of little hints, increasingly clear hints, that Bernie has some sort of demon in his past.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a ship called the Landry from the previous year that he was unable to rescue because of conditions. And not even just him, the station was unable to rescue.
Yeah, it's not like the most subtly done thing, but it's also not a Kirk Cameron movie. So you know what I mean? Like it's somewhere in the middle of those things.
So back on the Pendleton, Siebert has the men rigging a manual tiller. I thought this is cool. They're, tying stuff together, bolting stuff together to make just a big tiller on the back of the ship that they are pushing and pulling with this system of pulleys. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool thing.
Someone who knows like basic mechanics and engineering would probably be able to look at the movie and see if they're doing it right. But
fortunately, that's not us.
So some of the men are still determined to take the lifeboats, something that we see a lot, people panicking, people thinking that this is their only option to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So Siebert very dramatically grabs a hatchet and he storms toward this group of men, obviously with the intention for the viewer being like, oh no, he's not really going to brain this guy with a hatchet, is he?
Right.
And he pushes his way through and he just like hacks at the cable that's holding the lifeboat, and it falls into the ocean. And then in like 2 seconds, it smashes against a ship into a million pieces.
It's very dramatic. It's very quick and very dramatic.
It's very illustrative of the point he was trying to make.
I guess it does like move the plot though, and shows you lifeboats are not an option.
So he explains that running aground is really their only option. He explains that he'll need men on the tiller, on the pumps, a bucket line, and he'll need someone to keep blowing the whistle.
I just really hate that, like, that's the best option if I'm in that situation.
Running my half a ship aground.
My half ship. So
search planes spot the stern of the Pendleton, and Clough makes a decision to send Weber out for the Pendleton. Weber is Bernie, is Chris Pine. Here we get our favorite line when some of the other Coast Guardsmen are trying to basically convince Bernie to basically just phone it in and, take the boat out because that's what he's been ordered to do. Go to the mouth of the harbor, sail around a little bit and come back and just say the conditions are too rough.
And honestly, like, who would have thought less for doing it? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like rational person would be like, oh, well, it is too bad.
Obviously, that would be parallel to the previous story that's obviously bothering him so much.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a chance for basically redemption here. And he says our favorite line with the Coast Guard. He says, in the Coast Guard, they say you got to go out, but they don't say you got to come back in.
That is our favorite line.
So on the Pendleton, they navigate towards a shoal by relaying information from crewman to crewman. So obviously, because they have no communication or like power on the ship, everything is manual. And so they have this like telephone line of people from like the lookout down to where they're steering the ship with the tiller.
Mm-hmm. I actually would be interested in like talking or seeing interviews with some of these people in real life, just as like a study of human communication, small group like organization, because you have to assume a lot of these guys, you all know each other, but that doesn't mean you work with each other necessarily. So if you're like in the engine room and you're working with the cook and the cook's working with just a deckhand, like, how do you work together? Like, it's not easy to work in a small group when you don't know people. I think we've all been in those situations in work or school or something that like there's a weird feeling out period to figure out the kind of what the hierarchy is and who's responsible for what. But in a situation like this, you don't have time for that. And it is interesting to kind of see that dynamic.
Yeah. Sometimes when people get thrown together in small groups like that, it works out. Like Baker Mayfield last night on Thursday Night Football.
You know what? It's worth delaying this episode this long just to get that metaphor, right? Redemption for Baker.
Right. Good for him. I was happy to see that.
Yeah, I was happy to see that too.
So yeah, the engine room is flooding badly at this point, and they're about to lose their engines entirely. So at this point, they obviously they still have power. They just can't steer.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're about to lose that. So there's a 4-man Coast Guard crew heading out to rescue the Pendleton. This is Bernie's crew. One of the guys makes the comment. He says, please tell me we're taking that boat to a bigger boat. Because this is not a big boat that they get in.
Yeah.
The way that it's shot, it looks like there's barely enough room for those 4, and they're going to put a lot more people on it. Back on the Pendleton, they start losing power after a really bad wave. They lose the tiller. And as that happens, it also appears to put another hole in the side.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. Like, that's not, it's not ideal what's going on there.
Miriam comes to the Coast Guard station to listen along to this process as Bernie goes out.
Would you want to listen to that if you were her?
Probably not. I don't know.
Like, I feel like there's a reason they don't let you in the operating room when like they're operating on a loved one. You know what I mean? You don't always need to see how the sausage gets made. Yeah,
it's presented here as like the Coast Guard guys are being insensitive for not wanting her to be there, but it's like, this is highly irregular, ma'am.
Ma'am, we are a military organization and we have rules.
So the other guys at the station, they explain the bar to her. That's something that gets mentioned here and there throughout the movie.
They're like, you have to go to school for about 4 years. You get a pre-law degree.
They express that they don't think Clough should have sent them out in this weather. So the bar is this set of shifting shoals that are nearby. They're, quote, never in the same place twice.
Also, ma'am, we don't want you to be here, but we're going to tell you how dangerous it is for everything that's going on.
Yes, let me tell you all the details now that you have decided to be here. So Pop, so this is back on the Pendleton. Pop, who is the one who's played by not Dwalin. Graham McTavish is his name. He yells a lot in this movie. He's kind of the grizzled, tough old guy. His character in this is much taller than Dwalin. So he warns about the chains snapping. So momentarily, I thought maybe we would get a chance at like a ghost ship repeat.
Yeah.
Back on the Coast Guard ship or boat, they start up a nice little rendition of Haul Away Joe as they approach the bar.
That's a top 5 sea shanty.
It is. They lose the compass after the first wave, followed by the loss of the engine.
That's 2 important things to have.
At one point, the boat's fully submerged, but manages to get free and continue on without losing a man.
I do like that scene, actually.
I feel like that's a required scene for any movie about a relatively small boat. Mm-hmm. You have it in The Perfect Storm. You have it in this. You got to have it.
But like also something that if you've been out on a smaller boat in the ocean, like you've probably had it happen. Like obviously I've never experienced anything to that degree, but you've definitely been out. Like I've been out in big waves and had one break over the bow and pull the bow under and feel it pop up. Like it's a sensation. Like it is amazing though. Like at the end of the day, like boats want to float. So it is cool to see that.
So on the Pendleton, Siebert decides to throw the ship in reverse. He's trying to make the shoal, as otherwise, with their angle and speed, they're going to miss it. And if they miss it, they're basically screwed.
Mm-hmm.
They make it onto the shoal, but they take some damage in the process.
More damage, relatively speaking.
Yeah. They have to stop the water ingress and then keep themselves on the shoal. Here's where we see Rachel Brosnahan for the first time. We're back on land. She plays the character B. She picks up Miriam on the side of the road after she's been in like a minor car accident. Like her car skids off the road.
Yeah, I was reading some of like the true story behind this, and there like is a car accident involved, but it's not the way that it's shown in the movie. There's a few things that are different, obviously.
It's also not Miriam because Miriam's homesick with the flu this whole time.
Right. Yeah, there's just more going on than the movie, which I get though. It's hard to show all these different things in a movie, but there's also a lot of jumping around. I feel like this movie at this point gets a little chaotic. Like you have a lot of quick cutting to different scenes.
So back with the Coast Guard, they're trying to find Pendleton without their compass. So all this rough weather, they don't have a compass. They don't even know where they're going, basically. On the Pendleton, the flooding in the engine room continues until they start to lose power because the breakers have been tripped. So they're trying to keep water from reaching the air intakes to the engines. There's some debate on the Coast Guard boat about whether or not to turn back. Bernie makes the case that since they made it out this far, they can't turn back.
I feel like I'm Team Bernie there. Like we did the dangerous part. Like we're not going to go do that again right now.
Bernie bro.
Yeah, I'm a Bernie bro for this.
Yeah, you literally did the part that everyone was worried about.
Yeah.
Why would you turn around and do it again?
We're not going to do that again until we have to.
So Miriam turns on the radio at B's house and listens to the rescue of the Mercer. And B tells her it's best not to listen. Now it's revealed that B's husband, Arnie, had been one of the men lost on the aforementioned Landry.
It's all coming together.
There it is. Closing the circle. The Pendleton finally loses power completely. Soon after this, Bernie and his crew turn on the searchlight and are able to see the Pendleton. Works out perfectly. Seeing that the ship is still manned, Bernie asks how many they can get on their boats. He's told they can fit 22 tops, but regulation is 12. It's kind of a little bit of a callback to the marriage thing, where Bernie mentions, he's like, oh, that's just regulation, right? Again, he's seeing the regulations and making decisions to strategically violate them.
Yeah, Bernie's like, to heck with those regulations.
Right. Men are loaded onto the Coast Guard boat after descending the rope ladder. Tiny, the cook, is sadly lost when he falls from the ladder.
Who, of course, ironically, isn't Tiny.
Exactly. He's thrown against the side of the Pendleton. That's a detail. In general, the rescue and the wreck portions of this are very, very accurate. The accuracy score would be very high. This is one detail that they changed probably for, I think, what are pretty clear reasons. In the actual rescue, so this person did fall into the water during the rescue portion, but it was actually the Coast Guard boat that he impacted that ended up killing him, rather than the Pendleton.
I feel like that would just be a little harder to show on screen in this movie. Like, it'd be different if it was a more gritty movie.
Yeah, that would be a little bit of like a buzzkill of the Coast Guard killed this guy, even though that's not really what happened. Like, what would have
right. I do feel like this movie straddles the line a little bit. Like, you can tell it's like a Disney product, that it doesn't go all the way. Like, in the grittiness and darkness, it still, at the end of the day, has like a little streak of a Hallmark movie in it. But it's still a good movie.
Yeah, and like we said, playing with the true events, but in a way that helps them craft the movie. Like Miriam and Bernie's courtship was, I mean, they were already married at this point.
Yeah, which I do think is a little weird, because you could make a really compelling movie still where they're married.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that would be necessary. But again, like with Miriam being sick this whole time, no one wants to watch, cut scenes to this lady like just in bed with the flu, listening to the radio.
But you could, in a darker, grittier movie,
you could
have her be in and out of like fever dreams and like, you know what I mean, dreaming about how horrible it is. Like, what's the best scene in Apollo 13? It's the scene where Tom Hanks's wife is dreaming and the spaceship like disintegrates.
That's a good one.
So like, you could do that if you wanted to make that movie, but this just isn't that movie.
I personally think the best scene in Apollo 13 is when the sisters are arguing and the one says something about the stupid Beatles breaking up, and the older sister says, "They're not stupid, you're stupid."
I mean, they are overrated. We're going to get canceled for Beatles hate.
Good thing this is a bonus episode.
Right, I know.
My opinion on the Beatles is that, like, I don't like when people say they don't like the Beatles, because the Beatles made like an ungodly amount of music. There's something in there that you like.
Sure.
Maybe you don't like all their stuff. I don't like their early sappy Love Me Do stuff.
Eleanor Rigby, though, that's a fine song. I don't dislike it.
Yeah, there's a Beatles song or songs for everyone.
Here Comes the Sun. It's good. Play the hits. The real hits.
So one of the crewmen, the one who kind of is one of the, not like an antagonist, but he is one of the more difficult crewmen. At the end, he says, "You did good. You should be the last one off, Mr. Siebert."
I like how that can be read two ways.
I think on the surface, it could sound like it would be very out of context and weird to be like, like a, I don't know, an insult or something, saying, "Oh, you should be last off the ship." Whereas like it far more likely, this character is acknowledging that he has become the captain through his actions.
Look at me. I'm the captain now.
Look at him. He's the captain now. And so, yeah, by saying you should be last off, of course, the captain, sometimes, yes, the captain goes down with the ship, but other times, if it's feasible, maybe the captain's just the last one off the ship. So, yeah, I think by pointing that out, it's kind of a cool little comment. Bernie has to revert to the most basic navigation to get home. He's got this super overloaded boats. He's got no compass, and it's dark and stormy, so he doesn't have any other way to like celestially navigate. So he uses the wind. He says, "I had the wind on my left coming out, keep it on my right going back in, follow the lights on shore."
I think I do like these kind of stories where it's sort of like it's the Miracle on the Hudson, right? It's someone who's just skilled at what they do, and they do something that you really shouldn't be able to do. And they always seem so calm about it.
Right. Well, and yeah, that goes back to like his comment when they were talking about overloading the craft. I think one comment's like, "Oh, we'll have to come back for them." And he says like, no, like either we're all surviving or we're all dying. Like that's how this is going to go. So on the way back, the seas are calmer. The high tide carries them back over the bar. They see the lights from cars on shore and turn on their own searchlights to signal the shore. Katie pointed this out because we were watching this. One of the details that she really hated from this was at the end when everyone has their cars lined up on the shore and the boat's coming in, And I think it's Miriam who like turns her lights on, and everyone's like, turn your lights on. Hey, everyone, turn your lights on. And it's like, this is a seaside community who presumably has like had issues like this before.
Right.
How is this a revolutionary concept that like more light would be good?
Right.
Like when they all drove their cars up there, that's what I thought they were doing it for, was so they could turn their lights on.
Instead of just to watch.
And then Miriam has this eureka moment of like, hey, we could shed some light on the situation. And that's how the movie ends, really.
It is a quick ending. Like
there's a Time magazine article for when this came out, kind of looking at some of that's where I picked up a lot of the fact versus fiction of this. And again, there's not much of this involving the actual ship parts that are heavily fictionalized. That's why I think it was a pretty cool movie from a, maritime perspective. Really, it's really just kind of the personal interaction stuff that was changed. So yeah, overall, pretty decent movie.
It's, for me, this is like a 3.5 out of 5, 4 out of 5, maybe. You could have made this movie 20 minutes longer and a lot grittier, and it probably would have been a better movie. But it also only had a budget of like 70 to 80 million, and that probably turns it into like 120 million. But it's a good. I mean, I don't think it's a bad movie for what it is.
Yeah, entertaining. I would say if you've got like a basement theater with surround sound and a big screen, probably a cool movie.
Yeah, it looked good on the basement TV when I watched it down there. Kind of a darker, kind of more intimate environment. It was a good time. Mm-hmm. The acting is what you'd expect from decent level actors and everything. It did not do well in the box office, though. It looks like it only grossed about 52 million against that 80 million budget. So,
ouch.
Not a moneymaker.
But I guess Disney can afford to lose some money here and there.
Yeah, like I don't feel bad for them. That's probably why I had to crank up the cost of the Fast Pass even more.
I would say I'm sure this is probably really basic like marketing theory, but like, doesn't it make sense for Disney to occasionally make a movie like this where it's like kind of, it's not like drippingly patriotic, but it's like, telling the story of, one of our military services, and like, if they lose money, so what? It makes them look good.
I think honestly, this movie is the perfect example of just giving you depth for your streaming platform. You know what I mean? It's just a solid movie to stick on Disney Plus now, and people will find it. It'll be an entertaining Saturday night. It's kind of nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we have to say about it. The best thing about this episode is that it seems like it will actually exist now.
Yes. I am glad that the Zencaster gods have been appeased.
Yeah.
I hope they behave for our next episode.
Yeah, with that, we're going to wrap this up. We have our second episode of Lusitania to record. So we're going to get on that, which is now 2 of 4. We've decided to extend that out by one more episode. Kind of our Zeno's paradox of every time we finish an episode, we're just going to add one more onto the series. But yeah, we have that to record, so we'll get going on that. And we hope you enjoyed this bonus episode.